V2VG video podcast where we are doing take 2.5
Yes.
of end of service paperwork that Veterans to Veterans group here at the Case Management Team we use to triage veterans who come in when they make a request for assistance.
Yes.
Right. So you can see here, these are the general types of end of service paperwork that we do. There are other paperwork that we accept on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
Right. But this is typically what we do, what we request, which is a standard DD-214, which we're going to start with. And,
And as of this year, right, 2025, all end of service documents are supposed to be transferred to just a DD-214. So you
Right.
shouldn't have, moving forward, you shouldn't be coming in contact to the NG-22 and those.
Because the National Guard did issue NGB 22s and things like that, and I believe I read an IPSA that said that they're going to be issued a DD-214, which will make things a lot more streamlined for us in the office going forward, but we'll see. So we've redacted the information on these DD-214s, no names, social security numbers. This information is an
Addresses.
authorized signature, so that's not the person, it doesn't matter. So this is a standard regular Army DD-214 that you might come across. The difference between Veterans to Veterans Group and a lot of service organizations or charities that use DD-214s and end of service paperwork is that Chuck and I are both veterans and we know how to read DD-214s. A lot of times they'll say, oh look, they have a DD-214, good enough, moving on.
Yes.
Not the case.
There are differences that a lot of people don't realize between the four branches of service, because Coast Guard is technically Homeland Security.
It is. It's Homeland Security and Department of Defense. So it has a little bit of a difference to it. Yeah.
And we haven't come into contact with anybody from Space Force, so I have no idea what their documents look like. But just in, like Eric said, this is Army, and if you look at Block 2,
which is right here,
it says Army RA. That's regular Army. That means that person was enlisted, not a reservist, not National Guard.
Right.
The other thing I really want to point out, if you go to Block 4A and 4B, grade, rate, and rank is going to change between the branches of service.
It will, yeah. Usually not the pay grade, but the
pay grade won't.
The rank does.
So, an E1 in the Army is a private 1, right?
Yep.
In the Marines, it's just a private.
Yep.
E2 is private for Army. E2 is a PFC for Marines. So it's good to know how they're connected, but 4B is the one you should be focused on.
Yeah, this is the one you should focus on, the pay grade. And now the reason it's important is because you can get a lot of information when you look at the pay grade or the rank, depending on how familiar you are, versus the years of service, which is Block 12. If they've had a lot of years of service and they're a low pay grade, you can pretty much guarantee they've had some trouble with the military NJP, which is, I believe, non-judicial punishment, or Article 15s or whatever. So it just it paints a bigger picture. So,
and this one,
it's important to look at this stuff.
So typically, most branches of service, 3 to 4 years in, you should be at least in E2, knocking on E3 door, or E3 working on E4. So that's when you look here in this net 12C says 3 years of active service, and they're only in E1. And we'll get down to the bottom part where we can figure out if there's time lost. But typically, in these situations, it'll be a non-judicial punishment, which means you just go in front of the commanding officer. Hey, you screwed up. You admitted to it, so we're going to take your rank.
We'll see what happens.
And go from there.
And different branches of service have different
ways of conducting
promotions
that,
and things. So in the Army, 3 or 4 years, you're looking at specialists if you've done everything the right way or higher. So what we look at is those things. We look at command to which transferred. If it says you're transferred to a reserve component, we know that you've been transferred to the reserves, and you probably don't have, this isn't your end of service document because you're probably in the reserves, so it's something else to look at. The other thing that we look at is your date, your record of service. The date you entered, the date you separated. We don't really care if you've had overseas service. Our charity doesn't matter if you're a combat veteran for our purposes. A lot of other organizations, they do differentiate between combat veterans and non-combat veterans. It's not really an issue for us.
If you're talking about VFW, you're going to want to make sure you have that there. But also, if we have a situation like this, where the person obviously has been reduced in rank, and we find out there's a story behind it, something happened overseas, and then they returned home and they were, got into alcoholism or drugs or whatever and have been clean since, it gives us a little bit more case-by-case details to work with.
The other thing you want to look at is remarks. Section 18. You can see what they wrote. In this case, it says member has completed first full term of service. Nothing follows. So we know they ETS'd most likely. They've completed it. Fine. You go down here. Let's see. Their signature. Fine. This is a very important section. The special additional information. Type of separation. Release from active duty. Good. Big one. Character of service. Honorable. Big. With that, we also marry that with the narrative reason for separation. In this case, it's an honorable discharge for completion of required active service. Okay? Now, if it was different, if it was under other than honorable or dishonorable or under honorable conditions, we check with what the separation code is, what the narrative separation is, maybe the reentry code, because sometimes it says they can re-enlist with the waiver. Sometimes it says they're not eligible for re-enlistment. That's a big one. And then, of course, what Chuck is saying, block 29, is dates of time lost during this period. And, of course, that's indicative of time in the brig.
In the brig or AWOL or desertion.
Right. And those are big things. So the big thing we want to talk about is what we do here in the office is we don't look specifically at any one specific area. We look at the culmination of all the areas together and paint the picture.
Yes.
Right?
And so for anybody who's actively serving...
Mm-hmm. Right. Good point.
If you look at block 6...
Right, which is up here, block
reserve
6.
Obligation termination date. So that is the actual end of your contract. So like my situation, I enlisted for 5 years active, 3 years inactive.
Yeah, it's always 8.
So
okay,
it's something to be aware of if you're still serving or you just recently got out and you get some sort of a phone call. Just be aware that you're still under contract even though you're not actively serving.
You might see IRR, inactive ready reserve. It's always 8 years. Typically, it's a 4x4, 4 years of active service, and then 4 years of inactive ready reserve. Sometimes it's 6x2, whatever. But you might see somewhere in the narrative remarks that it's an IRR, inactive ready reserve. That's all that means. So it's always an 8-year term, but not necessarily an 8-year enlistment.
Exactly.
You could do 4x4, 6x2, so on and so forth. You do the math. And so that's what we look at. And sometimes there are inaccuracies in the DD-214, and that's how we can start looking at whether it's a case of stolen valor or a case of, whatever. And another thing to remember is sometimes, and it's not infrequent, the soldier or airman or whoever, the Marine who writes these up makes a mistake. For example, my personal DD-214 has a couple mistakes on there. So I had to contact the Personnel Record Center and had to have it fixed. So I actually have an addendum on my DD-214 because if you look at my whole DD-214, you say, oh, this doesn't really make much sense. It's because they made a mistake when I was getting medically retired from the Army. So sometimes it's just a mistake. So you don't want to just look at it and say, make a snap judgment and say, oh, this guy's no good, whatever. We always want to give the veteran a chance to explain themselves,
Absolutely.
because you never can be quite sure right off the bat.
No, absolutely. And I guess a pretty common one is in Block 13. You'll see, in this situation, you'll see Afghanistan campaign medal.
Right around here. This is Block 13.
But in Block 12, there'll be zeros all throughout foreign service.
And that was my big mistake on mine. It said I had no foreign service, and I was like...
But yet you had the medals and
I
ribbons.
had all the medals and ribbons saying that I was deployed overseas. So I contacted them and said, something doesn't follow. So, that's an example of that. It's a very common one for sure.
And if there is a mistake, typically what they do is they don't send you a whole new DD-214.
No, they send you
like
an
an attachment.
Yeah,
so
I got a slip of paper that I have to attach to mine.
Be aware of that. Make sure you keep that with.
So that's it. This is a regular Army, a regular DD-214. It's honorable ETS, which is it's just a standard DD-214. So we'll skip out of this and go to which one do you want to go to?
The reserve training.
Reserve training. All right. So this is a reserve DD-214. So this is also a DD-214, and by the way, you can find the form at the bottom left. DD-214.
Form name. Yep.
We get these a lot, and this is from a Marine reservist, USMCR, United States Marine Corps Reserve. And a lot of agencies who don't know how to read DD-214s, they'll say, "Oh, here's a DD-214. Here you go." Not so fast, right?
And so some of the things that you can look at to find out if it's a training is last duty station. If it's school of anything, chances are it's for training.
And this is Camp Lejeune, which is that's a training.
That's your basic.
That's your basic.
Right after boot camp, you go and you do your school of infantry stuff.
Now, the difference is the Marine Corps will say R on there for reservists. The Army doesn't differentiate between that, so you have to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Which is good for the Marines to put the R.
That's because we're dumb.
Well, so there's that, but you got to look into that, and then it says Block 9, right, Chuck? What does it say on?
Yeah, that's the
command to which transferred. Yeah. So it says Londonderry. There's no Marine base in Londonderry, right? So it's a Marine station, or what do you guys call it? Like a station
base.
So that's another indicator. Right?
And then the other one is in Block 12C.
12C is 12, and you go down to C, net active service.
Active service is period only 6 months. Chances are you're not enlisted and getting a DD-214 unless it's a medical situation or training after 6 months. So that's another key factor to look for.
And so again, like we said, we look at the totality of the DD-214. You go down, you look at the remarks. There's a lot of remarks on here, all right? And then, of course, but the other thing that other organizations look at, they say, oh, look, released from active duty. Yes, because when this Marine was being trained, he or she was on active duty. It's the same exact training that all the other Marines get. So they say, look, release from active duty, completion of required active service. From training.
Yes.
Not from their active service. Characterization of service is honorable. Yeah, we get that, because during training, they had honorable service. However, they could have got to their reserve training command and been a total dirtbag been totally fine during training. So this is not an end of service training documentation. It's just training. So we try to educate these other charities and other organizations that this does not qualify for our charity's end of service documentation. That's an important distinction that we make. On that same note, there's a deployment DD-214.
Because once you get a new set of orders, no matter what branch of service, when you get a set of orders, if it's a reserve, it's going to have reserve component, whatever.
Sure.
But when you're deployed overseas, no matter the situation, it's always going to be an activated time of service.
Right.
So
in this case, it happens to be a United States Army reservist. In this case, it says USAR. They don't always put that. But it could have been anything. But in this case, it's a reservist. It could have been a National Guardsman, whatever. National Guardsmen who are activated for deployment also get a DD-214.
Yes.
Reservists do. This is a Staff Sergeant, E6. Place entered into active duty, Fort Drum, New York. That's all indicative. Here's all the medals. This person's got a bunch of stuff. But the big thing to take into consideration is down here, it says release from active duty, honorable. Completion of retired active service. Yep, we get all of that. And that's all good. However, when you look at the record of service, right, Block 12, the date they entered service was 2009. They separated this period. This period, like Chuck said, 2010.
So, but if you go to 12D,
Delta, right here, total prior service.
Total prior active service is a year and 10 months, but below that, E is total prior inactive service. That would be all the time he spent in the reserves.
9 years, 5 months.
That's
again,
how
totality,
you tell.
right? So, this is an indicator that this is a deployment DD-214. All right, so this is that this reservist was deployed, and obviously when you marry that to Afghanistan campaign medal with campaign star, this veteran went to Afghanistan twice and all this other stuff. So this is a deployment DD-214. Again, not an end of service DD-214.
And this one is kind of both because it is retirement. And the other,
in this particular instance,
Block 6, where it says the reserve obligation, and it's zeroed out because he has fulfilled everything and is retiring
after his deployment.
So that's
again, this is an indicator that we look at all of the DD-214 to check it out. However, and by the way, like I mentioned, if this was a National Guardsman, he or she would have gotten a DD-214. But a National Guardsman who's not deployed and who gets discharged from the National Guard does not get a DD-214, then they get an NGB-22, which is a totally different, but it does say National Guard Report of Separation and Record of Service. It's got the same information.
It's just
a different form.
Yeah, it's a different format, and some wording may be slightly different as well.
Right. But it's got all the information. It's got their name, Army, ARNGS, MAARNG. It's an Army National Guard, Mass Army National Guard. In this case, it was a sergeant. It's an E5. He's an E5 or she. I don't remember who this was. It doesn't matter. It says active duty service. It's irrelevant for our purposes. This is not the person. This is the authorizing officer. So the big thing down here is the characterization of service was honorable. And, the re-enlistment eligibility is RE1, which means they are free to re-enlist if they choose to. And secret clearance, that's irrelevant to what we're trying to do. But it does say net services period 6 years, total service was 6 years, and off you go. It doesn't have as much information, but it has the same information. Right? So this is the end of service documentation for a National Guardsman. Again, a lot of times they'll say, well, I don't have a DD-214. That's strictly speaking correct. They don't have a DD-214. They have an NGB-22, which is down here, NGB Form 22. So what we say, and we've changed our verbiage, we don't need a DD-214 for all service members. We need end of service paperwork.
Yes.
And if they're still serving, we just need an LES, which is a leave and earning statement, or a letter from their command if they're a first responder.
Being activated. Oh, yeah.
Being activated,
First responder or corrections.
We try to make it easy for our clients or our brothers and sisters to get service from us, but we do have paperwork requirements.
It's important to understand the mathematics involved, because if you're a reservist or a National Guardsman and you are trying to get VA benefits, you have to make sure there are certain requirements that you have to serve so many active time for.
Good point. Very good point.
Whether it be I think it's either 60 or 90 day, whatever it is.
Whatever the window is.
So it is important to understand that aspect when you're looking at your documentation.
And National Guardsmen and reservists, when they're activated for training, you hear 2 weeks in the summer and 1 week. when you go to training for 2 weeks at NTC or JRTC, you also get a DD-214 for that because it's a block of training. Again, that's not something we use for our eligibility. So we here at Veterans to Veterans Group, we are very clear on end of service paperwork because we don't care if you were a great soldier while you were in. We care about the totality of your service.
And honestly, if you are a shitbag when you're in your boot camp phase, that's you're not gonna get a good DD-214. But if you get one from training, who knows what happens after the training? And that's the point that. Plus, we want to be able to look at the person's end of service, but also the criminal background since that time frame. So if it's somebody who did have alcohol problems and related issues and was released from that, had they had a bunch of DUIs?
Yeah,
and so
against totality of the situation.
So,
and like I had mentioned in the beginning, Chuck and I were talking, if there is a problem with the veteran service and they have an other than honorable or under honorable conditions or whatever, it's not an automatic no when we triage. It's just we take a closer look and we give the veteran a chance to explain what happened. And then we make a decision in the office or with the board, depending on the situation, because it's very rare, unless it's a dishonorable flat out, that we just flat out say no because we know there's extenuating circumstances.
Yeah. And, if you have something that's not honorable, whether it be general under honorable or other than if you have the documentation and are able to present a strong case, you can get your end of service type discharge upgraded, which we've helped somebody do.
We actually helped a veteran get their dishonorable upgraded to general. So it's not impossible as long as you have a good reason and you have the documentation, like Chuck said. So it's not the end of the world. It's not an automatic no. But if you did the wrong thing, you did the wrong thing. So just bear that in mind, that we look at the totality. Other agencies don't. That's their policy, and this is our policy. So we just wanted to give you a little snapshot into what we do and why we do it.
Indeed.
All right. Thanks, folks. All right. 1, 2, 3.